What's the internal opinion on Yone? For solo queue, he's significantly weaker than Yasuo, but he's not seen buffs, as I imagine Pro plus Frustration play a role into that. Definitely Pro and Frustration both play a role. I think our perspective is that as long as Yone players are having a good time playing the champion, he's a champion that can exist at lower win rates, right? I think there's a number of these champions that still feel good at lower win rates, and actually some of the reason why they're lower is that they're played by people who don't have a lot of mastery of the champion, and they have at least some mastery skew. As another example of a champion that's like this is like Lee Sin. Right, like Lee Sin can feel really good at 48 because Lee Sin at 48 is, probably means that if you've put 100 games in on Lee Sin, you're probably way above 50 still, right? So it's like you'll still feel good as an experienced Lee Sin player, and the new players can feel that there's like mastery that they need to like get the full juice out of the champion, if that makes sense. And I think Yone is pretty similar, though. I don't think Yone is quite as hard as Lee Sin. I think there's a lot of similar things going on there where like, yeah, Yone can be, 47, 48 and still feel good. And the people who want to play a lot of Yone games can still win more than 50% of their games playing Yone with mastery. Ezreal is another good example of a champion like this, where like Ezreal can also feel good at 48. And a lot of that is because a lot of people play Ezreal, including people who haven't played a lot of Ezreal, right? A lot of, like, Ezreal's a pretty broad champion. Lots of different people like playing Ezreal.
Like, if you want an actual answer to that, because, it's pretty reasonable to give an actual answer to that, like, I disagree with the premise that everything in Dota has counterplay and that nothing in League does, or like that few things in League do. I think Dota is a game that has certain things that have counterplay and certain things that don't, and that's the exact same for League of Legends. So, as an example, Dota has a lot of targeted abilities, right? And so, in Dota, there's a lot of situations where your counterplay wasn't actually to say, like, hashtag dodge. It was to hashtag don't have been there, or hashtag simply do not play that character, play something else that, like, counterpicks, right? Like, Dota actually is a very, like, I'd say strategic game in the sense that, like, a lot of the counterplay in Dota to various characters is pick ban. It's like, hey, one of the ways to deal with this character, might be to buy an item, but like one of the big ways to deal with this character would be like, just pick the right character. Oh god, I'm gonna die. And so like, it depends on like what your definition of counterplay is, right? Like, if I was to say like what Dota does really well with I shouldn't say really well, but like what Dota does with counterplay, some of the things that Dota's counterplay indexes on is like strategic counterplay of like, did I pick the right character? Did I buy the right item? There's a lot of counterplay built into Dota's item and character systems, and things like that. Whereas like I think League of Legends tends to index a lot more on like moment to moment counterplay of like, did I dodge the skill shot? Did I dodge the spell? Things like that. And like I don't think either of those are necessarily inferior or superior to each other. I think League of Legends and Dota are both very good games that, have very like specific feels to them in terms of how you play them and how you play against them. Another thing with Dota counterplay that I think you see a lot in Dota is like kind of like time, like game time based counterplay, or like income based counterplay. It's kind of like hey, anti-mage, he's not really good right now because he hasn't farmed yet, and then like 30 minutes later, hey, anti-mage, you literally can't do anything to this guy right now because he farmed, right? And like the counterplay was like, well, how did he get farmed? Why didn't you kill him? Why didn't you stop him from farming? Things like that. Dota has like a very like hyper carry structure, and it's things like BKB is an example of this, where it's like BKB is really good at giving BKB is really good at like giving, say, like hyper carries the ability to. BKB gives like melee characters like really good ways to counter being CC'd, right? On the flip side of things though, if you're against a late game hyper carry who's building a BKB, certain characters just like do not have counterplay at that point. Because it's like, oh, well, they have a BKB. I'd like to stun them, but I can't. Although there are like true stuns, right? So maybe you get one of those. And so yeah, it's just a thing where it's like, it really just depends like where you want the counterplay in your game, what types of it you want, what moments, how strategic is it, how tactical is it? All those things. Did I hear the quote, if everything is broken, then everything is balanced? Yeah, I generally have felt when I've played Dota that tends to be how it goes. I think it's pretty cool. I think it's a pretty fun way to make a game.
What was the Tom Dev story? Okay. So, when I first came to interview at Riot, I had prepared so this is how the interview process used to work. It doesn't work like this anymore, but basically, interviewing for GAT used to be 2 phone interviews. So you would like do the phone interview, half-hour phone interview. If you pass it, you move to the next one. You do an hour phone interview about some different topics. If you pass that, Riot would fly you out to Los Angeles to interview you for an entire day in person. So the day started at 10, and it went until, I think it was 4 or 5 p.m., but it was basically interview blocks, like hour-long interview blocks the whole day. It was absolutely brutal. Horrible way to interview people, because by the end of the day, the people are so fried, myself included. It's like you've been getting these brutal, like hour-long, intense interviews the whole day, right? So, when I flew out to interview for the GAT position I was doing, my third interview, so I wasn't super fried at this point, was with 2 people. One of them was Daniel Klein, which if you don't know who that is, this is the guy who designed a lot of champions in the olden days, including TAHM KENCH. I didn't know that at this point, right? I knew his name was Daniel Klein, but I didn't know which, and I knew he made, actually at the time I thought of him as like the guy who made Lucian and Azir. I didn't realize he'd made TAHM KENCH. So one of the questions they opened up with, or they started with in the early parts, like after they'd introduced themselves and like, you know, talked to me, like got in, was he says, okay, so let's talk about TAHM KENCH. TAHM KENCH was a mistake, right? And like he said those words, and I was like, I'm with you so far, and like instantly. And Daniel Klein looks at me and he says, I made TAHM KENCH, by the way. And I was instantly like, oh no, I just blew the whole interview. And then he's like, and yeah, I agree. I said, yeah, anyway. Yeah, so basically the way it worked out was like, I said TAHM KENCH was a mistake. And ultimately, like, he was pretty cool with that. And it was like, the interview question was actually ultimately about like, why, like, what particularly about TAHM KENCH was the mistake. It was like, because he went through describing the initial process, and like ultimately, like, I think his process made a lot of sense. He was like, hey, at the time, the like when he was making TAHM KENCH, one of the problems that they had was that there was no systemic release valve for like pick comps, right? A lot of the popular things when he was working on like in pro and high elo solo queue and things, and like even for regular players, was like picks decided everything. And so what he wanted was a champion to counter picks, right? So what he was trying to make was like, okay, here's a champion that can deny enemy teams the ability to just like one-shot one of your teammates. Like, he's good against pick comps. The thing was, he made such a powerful anti-pick spell that not only was it enormously frustrating, but it also like makes other champions feel like their spells don't work anymore. Like, you viol someone and they get TAHM KENCH ulted, and you're like, what is this, right? Like, I like, my ult says that I knock this person up, and then I just don't knock them up, right? Like, my ult doesn't work anymore. Or like, oh, we were supposed to one-shot this person that I Lissandra ulted, and they don't have cleanse, but they just got TAHM KENCH ulted instead, and I can't kill them, right? It's like, it's literally impossible. Or like, oh, I Ahri charmed this person. They should die because I finally hit an Ahri charm on the 80 carry in this hectic team fight, and oh, nope, they got TAHM KENCH eaten, right? It's like, the goal was for him to make something that was really good against pick spells and pick compositions. And ultimately, he made a champion that was so good against pick spells that it completely shut those champions out of feeling like they could play the game at all, right? And that's kind of like, I totally empathize and like understand where he came from, but obviously like the conclusions that he came to, and this is like, you know, I had a lot of conversations about him later when I actually got hired, but it's like the conclusion that he came to, like his reasoning and his logic made a lot of sense, but he just went way too far, and the spell shape didn't really end up being good for League of Legends, right? Like, TAHM KENCH Devour, I think, is just generally not a good spell for League. It's a very fun spell to cast, but ultimately I don't think it's a particularly good spell for the game.